I had a thing for this. Hold on. Let me open my notes.
A quest? A quest? A questing I shall go.
Okay, I think there's like...
My quest continues.
I mean, I can point out ward spots too, but like I don't really think the ward spots are like the important part of this so much. I think it's like they're just key overall things you gotta understand about warding. At the end of the day, like suboptimal vision is better than no vision, right?
Right.
So really, number one, the worst shit, and you're very guilty of it, and so are a lot of other people, is just like having a shitload of wards like in your inventory all the time.
Yeah.
And that I
you
really cannot offer any advice for that. Just like stop fucking doing it. I'll grow a couple of brain cells or something. I really can't fix that one. Like you're doing more damage that way than anything else. But anyway, ignoring that kind of thing where you're just kind of like AFK in the brain or something and just not placing any wards. I can give some specific advice on like, because I assume basically what happens is you're like you don't like know where to place your ward. You don't have any like particular plan with the wards, so they just don't end up getting placed because you're thinking about something else or nothing at all. Who knows? Yeah,
mostly nothing at all. Or the other two scenarios are you're so far ahead that you're just like dead brain push, and then there's being so far behind you don't feel the ability to go get that control. We kind of talked about that where it's just like, oh, you're a warlock. It doesn't matter if you're dead if your ult's down. Just go do it.
Yeah, so
that's been helpful. Like those big ulti, long cooldown heroes, just go do it.
Yeah, and expanding that in general, like where you have to be on the map is like maybe slightly less critical as a 5 in general, whether or not you have cooldowns up. That's not necessarily true, but just kind of in general, you're more okay like running around spending time placing wards. That's why the 5 tends to buy most of the wards.
And I guess if you're like a P5 ogre too, if they're spending time chasing you because you're a big beefy boy, you're getting information by them chasing you and providing relief for your team.
Yeah, and that's why Bane's really good. It's super hard to kill a Bane early on because he can always nightmare like one of the people running after him, so it's super easy to just kind of wander around and make a lot of space.
Right.
Okay, but anyways, what do I talk about warding areas?
So every time I've warded in lane, the last few games that you've watched me play, you just straight up say, "Oh, that's an ass ward barrel rider." So.
Okay, well, I mean, we can talk about like some kind of broad stuff about wards. It's like you want to ward in like I think one of the times you were probably in this lane. I think you were in the off lane or something. What do you want to see here? Like, you want to see?
So I want to see them pool. So I can, like, I want to be able to see the pool, so that way I can go contest it. Especially if I feel the need to help my core more in lane instead of fucking around over here. There are some situations where I might want deeper vision, like if they have an Alk on the enemy team, I might want to get it up into their jungle to see when he leaves to go jungle, so I can go fuck with them.
Yeah. Okay, so broadly speaking, when you place a ward gives you like a big like area of vision. You don't need like, if it's right here, you can see how wide the arc is on the lower part of that vision. You can see a good 90 degrees. If you did, instead of that, say you move it up, it's like technically less vision. Like imagine that the other vision wasn't around there, but say you're just comparing 90 or 120 degrees of vision versus like 40 or whatever.
Yeah.
If you need information on like where someone is, if you see them and you see them for 2 seconds because your vision is this small versus like 4 seconds because it's this big, you have the same information either way. So you don't need wards that see area. You need wards that see lines that are like critical locations. And expanding on that, you need vision that sees certain movement paths. Like you want to be able to see someone walking down this high ground, like to here, or across here, or their support, rotating back this way, specifically to that camp. or down to this camp. You know, like there's these lines or paths that heroes tend to take. You don't need vision specifically like in the middle of this right here.
Right. So,
It just
like,
happens to be a pretty good spot for vision because it does see all those different things.
Yeah.
So
Maybe even further down, like right here on the path, you might be able to see that 4 minutes the rotation of the mid laner if they come up through the river or if they come up through the path.
So that's the difference between this ward and this ward up here is you won't see a river rotation.
My quest continues.
So you always hit the balance, and of course you hit the balance on like where your best vision is versus like what are the odds of it being dewarded. But as a general rule, like you don't want to think of vision in terms of like, oh, I just need to see as much as possible. You just need to think of it as like, what do I actually need to see? Which movement do I need to see? So
and
like,
a lot of that is hero dependent. Like there are mid laners that are just going to sit in lane, in which case I don't need to see that river spot. And then there's I'm going to hit level 2 and go jungle, and then cast Acid Splash in the wave.
Yeah. So like this is a ward spot I'll use sometimes because if you look at the blue overall, it's a lot less vision than like a ward right here, but it doesn't actually see anything less. Key thing being it sees to the left like that, where you can see a support kind of bouncing between trees and whatnot. It will see them cross if they're going to the small camp, which gives you that information. That gives you the same information as seeing a bunch of them right here. It's not any better in that sense. You still see them rotating through the river. You see almost all the same information as like this ward does.
Okay.
The only thing this ward is missing out on is it's not getting river vision. It doesn't, and that sometimes you want river vision, sometimes you don't. But just as an example, it's like this kind of ward, despite seeing less overall, is not a bad ward spot.
And I guess early game it matters less now since the power rune is at 4 minutes. In which case, like 2 more wards should have spawned.
Yeah, and I don't remember what ward you had placed that was like ass, but it was like something weird where it was like it was choked between some trees and like cut off some vision. It was like this kind of thing or something. And like not only is this small vision overall, this the arc on the left side that can be seen in like literally any of these ward spots, no matter where you put it, and like that vision on the right kind of doesn't matter so much. That's an unusual way for heroes to move. That's just not important. So there's a million wards you can place here, and they're all good for different things. What you see a river here. This is probably your safest ward that sees a lot of different things in the lane. You have your ward behind the tower, which will see where their 5 is sitting. It'll see TPs from other heroes. That this is the ward you place when you're like pushing the tier 1. Those kinds of things. So that's kind of just a way to think about it. And honestly, it's like as you're placing wards, I mean, like you can take the time to like float around like this and kind of see, hey, what's this ward gonna see? What is the best way to place this? And it's kind of an organic process. You kind of just do it on the fly. It's like, well, last time their sentry was like here, so I bet I can get a ward like over here that's just out of their sentry range, but still sees the whole river. Like it's a lot of like in the moment kind of decisions like that. Like there's not the perfect ward spots. The perfect wards are the wards that just don't get dewarded and still see things.
Right. In my bracket, I've been noticing about right where you are. And you even said this in the last game you were watching. I kept placing it here to immediately get dewarded, and then I started putting it a little bit further up, like in that. Yeah,
and the problem with that is that normally people, if they don't have a 5 that gives vision, they'll just put the sentry on the high ground, and you put your ward like here, so it still would have gotten dewarded. If you want to place a ward somewhere in the space that sees jungle vision and sees like rotations through the plateau here, like I normally place it like up here further. And sometimes they place it low ground and it gets dewarded anyways, but I mean, you can't place perfect wards every time. But yeah, I almost never place this ward because unless I am like literally roshing right this second and I know they don't have the time to fight over this ward.
Okay.
Like from Radiant side, like that's an example. Like, as a general rule, like these idiot-proof ward spots, like you don't use them unless you're ready to like sit around them and fight around them all the time. That was something I'm going to get to a little later. But anyways, so that's just kind of a way to think about vision in general. I will talk about some specific ward spots, but that's kind of not super important at the moment. So there's that. Okay, I covered the stockpiling wards like an idiot. Broad warding areas. Okay, one aside that's not really related to anything else. Although it's kind of related to stockpiling wards. This is how much I cannot emphasize this enough, especially in nighttime fights, with how bad my vision is here. Imagine just like I'm running into a fight that's in like, it's kind of weirdly split up. It's like there's some heroes here, there's some heroes here, maybe some heroes are like TP reacting from the tier 1, like it's just kind of like a scrappy fight. I can't see shit. Like, now it's daytime, so it's a bad example, but like I couldn't see anything during the night in that situation. So it's really, really important to have a ward on you at almost all times, that when a fight breaks out during the night, you just drop the ward somewhere. That gives you like a good amount of vision. It will, it's really subtle. It will win a lot more fights than you'd realize, though. Especially these high ground. That was the other thing I was going to talk about. These, like, this is the other reason to use this high ground spot, is, you know, spots that see over trees. No, you know, no one's going to get fogged by this tree or like wrapping around this tree here. You're going to see like other heroes kind of flowing into a fight that's happening over here. Like, you get so much information split second in the middle of a fight that your entire team can use and use to make decisions. And it doesn't, I mean, if you lose the ward, I mean, whatever, you place the ward for that fight. And that's something that it's hard to be heads up on, because people treat warding as like such a passive thing. It's like, oh, I'm walking to this area, I'm dropping 2 sentries, and I'm dropping an obs. It takes me like 30 seconds, and it's 3 actions. You know, it's inherently very low APM.
Yeah.
Placing a ward somewhere split second in the middle of a fight on top of everything else you're already doing is inherently very high APM, and it takes more effort to do that correctly.
Right.
Where was I?
My APM has deteriorated substantially since I was 24. But I also just don't click constantly anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need like APM to play Dota, but like you need a semblance of it, and you definitely wander around like way too much doing nothing.
Oh yeah.
And I don't mean APM like, oh, it's like you can't look at one player and say they have 200 APM, and this other player has 150 APM. This player's better. But if you've got 100 APM in your games, like, I'm sorry, you're not clicking enough. You're not doing enough in the game. Like, you're playing suboptimally. Probably just flamed like half of LD2L off of that. So that's like more.
No, I think a lot of people in LD2L are like using repeat auto click and stuff. So like,
yeah, that's the other thing. Is the APM
where...
value, yeah, it doesn't necessarily matter. But I don't know. I mean, like, I play 5. I don't feel like I'm particularly mechanically skilled, but I have like very high APM, and without an auto clicker. I mean, I do have an auto clicker, but I don't really use it outside of like maybe like a fight over a rune. So I'll use it like once a game. It doesn't add up that much. It's just a lot of clicking. You know, Dota's a pretty precise game, and when you come from an RTS background, you just kind of get used to making a lot of actions, even if each individual action is like maybe less important. Anyways, the big that was kind of like some little disconnected thoughts about wording. The big overall concept about wording is the good, when it comes down to it, is like the good words are the words that don't get deworded. That's what it comes down to. First thing you can look at is, for efficiency purposes and also for getting reliable vision, place words while you're smoking with your team. If you're ever at that point in the game where you just like have a couple words in your inventory and you're like, man, I feel like I need to get vision on the map somewhere, just like smoke up with a teammate and say, hey, let's go try to find some idiot. Maybe you don't find an idiot there, whatever. Then you farm their jungle right there and you drop the really deep ward under smoke. It's probably not going to get dewarded. You know, if you smoked, ran all the way into their jungle, and place like this ward when there are like tier 2s, tier 1s up, whatever, this is never getting dewarded. It's maybe not optimal vision, but it's like it's giving you information. You know, you see where their carry is farming in their deep jungle, or you know he's triangle because he's not here. You know, like you can always get information. And now you just know, it's like, I'm going to have this vision for 6 minutes now, 100%. There's no way they ever deward this. That kind of thing. The second way to maintain, this is, like, everyone knows, it's like, oh yeah, you know, it's like, I want to place a ward somewhere in this area, I'm going to put a sentry here first, before. If you wanted a ward in this space, and you were, say, approaching it from, like, mid-tier 1, you walked through a potential ward here, a potential ward here maybe, a potential river ward if Roche was, like, an issue, and then a ward here. All of that needed to be sentryed. You needed, like, if they saw you here placing a ward because you didn't put a sentry down, they will deward it. If they saw you right here, walking into your jungle, and then you walk back out and you have one less ward on you, what do they think is going to happen? Like, they didn't need to see the ward leave your inventory to know that you warded there. and they will go plaster that area with a bunch of sentries. So that's as you're kind of moving across the map, and you cannot literally always do this. You have a finite amount of money and a finite number of sentries. But in general, like you're probably placing on average like any deep ward, you're placing at least 2 sentries to make sure you could have placed that ward in the first place, if you were remotely worried about it getting dewarded. That's why you see 30 sentries a game and 30 obs in a game. It's because a lot of obs are just kind of randomly placed, but the deep ones that you really need to make sure don't get dewarded, you are placing multiple sentries to make sure that that space was able to be established.
Allow me.
So that's kind of a general thing. Like, I don't see people buying nearly enough sentries in general. There's a reason there's a cap on them now, is because as soon as sentries got cheap enough, people realized you can just plaster the entire map in sentries and your opponent can just never have any vision anywhere.
Right.
Which leads to the last way you make sure your wards don't get dewarded, or at least until it doesn't matter anymore. This ward is like a random ass deep ward that won't get dewarded early in the game. But if you're pushing this tier 2 tower, your goal as a team, you got some core like pushing down this, waiting to go into this space. Your goal as a team is to establish control of their plateau here. You see their TP location, you see rotations from mid lane. They can't ever get the jump on you. You're playing from the high ground. Their only TP spot is like here. To secure that, you're gonna need vision down. The thing is, it's pretty fucking obvious that, like, oh, you see some core, it's like, oh, I don't see anyone on their map, they're probably in our jungle, because their core is now pushing down this lane, and they're setting up for a tier 2 push. They know you have vision here, they're not stupid. Like, of course you put vision down. Maybe it's here, maybe it's here, maybe it's over here, whatever. Doesn't matter. So, you need to use this time, and you need to work with your team to establish vision and say, hey, we need to play around this vision. You have such a big advantage in any fight that happens in this space because you have perfect knowledge of exactly where everyone is. Like, no hero, except for like weird stuff like Ember Ags and Storm and whatnot, like functions beyond this range. There's no way they can ever really get the jump on you, if that makes sense. So you always have the advantage playing from high ground and playing with vision up. So you can not literally always, but like there's always potential to defend your wards because you have the vision advantage. But if you just like walked in, this shit happens all the time in my solo queue games, and it's just kind of natural where it's like I'm seeing an opportunity to like, okay, I know my core is farming in their jungle up here, he's shoving this lane in, we have a catapult wave spawning, we can pressure their tier 2. So I like run into their jungle, I sentryed this, I sentryed here, sentryed maybe here, probably not, and then I place deep vision down. And I had my 3 with me or something, my kill hero, and I'm like, okay, let's sit in this space, and if anyone comes in here, we just fucking murder them. And then, the pub game thing happens, and then this carry who was pushing this lane in decided to TP bottom to react to some, like, random ass tower push or whatever. And then this push ends, and then so my 3 decides to go jungle or farm a different lane or whatever, and then I just kind of have to leave because I can't do anything myself, and then I just lose that ward immediately. It happens a lot. And it's not like this kind of thing where you can just magically always play around your vision and defend your vision. But working with your team to keep up vision and then play around it is really important. And you can lose this ward after this tower dies. It's not the end of the world. Like, you needed this ward to make sure you could push this tower, so it wasn't an option to not have it. The same thing with, like, if you're roshing, you need vision in this space, or you need people playing in this space. If you're roshing from Dire, like, you need to control this space and have vision of it. After you get rosh, there's gonna be like 3 sentries clearing this entire area. You're probably not gonna keep the vision, but that's fine. It's not the end of the world. You got what you came for, which was to secure an objective, and this is the same idea.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Okay, so that's
over here.
That's all like the big stuff. Now, I'll talk about like objectives and kind of
So, like,
I'm trying to think if I want to talk about the map at all or not, or like where you would place different wards. But what were you gonna ask?
So, in terms of objectives, like, obviously you want vision so you can safely take them, especially, like, it's very easy, the tier 1, on the enemy's safe lane tier 1, you can just kind of get the ward behind the tower, watch them come through, like, right there. The tier 2 on Radiant side and Dire side, you can be uphill on the cliff spot or in the center of the jungle to see...
The tier 2, from which side?
Either side. So, because you have the center of the jungle, they both have the dummy cliffs. And it's kind of easier to get a deeper ward on the Radiant side behind the tier 2, like in front of where the creeps come out as well. So you can see that whole breadth of area. They're trying to group in behind, but I guess like that doesn't protect from a smoke gang through the jungle or whatever. But like mid is just hard.
Yeah. So mid tier 2. Okay, so this is not really related to Warden specifically. The mid tier 2 on both sides is the hardest tower to take on the map by far. As soon as you get yourself into like if you're Radiant, as soon as you get yourself into like this kind of space trying to set up for a push here, they can come from here, they can wrap around from behind with a smoke, they have like a, you know, one spot here, one spot here, one spot here to come from, they have both of their jungles to come from, like there's all this high ground around you and all of these trees that make collapsing on you really, really easy. And it's hard to, the only real ways to push are to like control one side and then kind of push it from like a weird angle where like, you know, they can't come from here because your team's backing you up. And so like your whole team's here, you put vision down, you have some guy floating here to kind of make sure they don't wrap that way, maybe someone's floating back on this side, and then you have like whoever's pushing the tower pushing here, and then everyone else is backing them up in this space. But yeah, there's no way you can just kind of like walk down the middle of the lane and just kind of easily take these towers. It's really challenging. So it kind of depends on what you're, as far as like vision for pushing those towers, it sort of depends on what you're trying to do. It's like, you know, I'm always placing this ward whenever I'm trying to push this tower. You see the people behind the tower, you can try to force a fight behind the tower by jumping some critical hero before a fight around the tower even happens. That's it's a way to force the issue. Other than that, you know, you kind of just have to pick a side to control. Because realistically, you don't really end up with both when you're trying to push this tower. So you take one and then you acknowledge that they can come from the other side. Sometimes if your vision's crazy good, you'll have like these two wards down and then like also a ward over here that was like left over from earlier or from like a smoke or something, and then you feel pretty safe.
Shine on.
But in general, yeah, it's a very hard tower to take. And Radiant largely has the same problem. It's just that taking the plateau here is a little bit better. Or certain heroes play pretty well from this set of trees, which is nice. I'd say it's just like a bit easier to push than the dire tier 2 mid. Some people might disagree with that, but that's just kind of my gut feeling.
And then, I guess the next objective to cover is Roche. Like, how to... Like, every game is just, in Legend Bracket, is supports just running at each other and dewarding each other around Roche, probably for 10 minutes before Roche gets done.
Yeah.
Without,
So,
like, nothing really gets accomplished from both sides, and then the support players are just, instead of playing Dota, they're doing chores.
yeah, and that just comes from like a sort of general disorganization when it comes to pub games. You know, one player kind of sets up vision there because it's like the most obvious vision. It's like, oh, this is such a big objective. We not only do we have to fight around this, but they want to fight around it too. So of course we want to have vision in this area. But that comes down to the same kind of thing. It's like there's going to be a lot of people fighting over it. So this is why this side of the map, as a general rule, is just way less important than this side in almost every game. So if you're Dire, you want to try to take this space from the Radiant to set up for a Roche or to prevent them from taking Roche. On the flip side, you know, if you're Radiant, you want to try to like hold this kind of space to do the same thing on the other side. And all that comes down to is, you know, defending the space for long enough to secure Roche, or just saying fuck it and sneaking Roche and seeing what happens. But other than that, I mean, it's like, I mean, this is a really good ward spot, like just in the river. Like you, by having your ward, you know, here you kind of see behind Roche a little bit on both sides, along with just any rotation coming from this way. These cliff spots used to be good for Roche, but since Roche is now in this kind of weird spot, it's just a little too far away to like have decent vision in this space. If you know they had to come from the side for whatever reason, the cliff wards aren't bad, but really like don't be afraid to just drop this ward in the middle of the river. And similarly, like always sentry it too.
Right. Okay.
But that's what Roche comes down to, is there's like situational stuff, like if you're Radiant side, like if you can hold this vision, It's really good because there's nowhere they can really come from where you won't see them coming. Maybe you lose the ward, but at least you have like the intel. This ward's kind of the same thing, but it's stuff like they'll fight over, and you'll lose really easily. These wards kind of the same thing on both sides. This ward is like the classic one. This ward's better actually if you can get it deep enough, because by the time they realize the camp's blocked, they like you might already have Roche or whatever. That's one I'll place a lot, even though you'll lose the ward almost immediately. But the only like truly like 100% of the time you want this ward fighting over Roche is just one right in the middle. There's nothing else. And then like maybe situationally there's some ward you want behind if they have like a blink initiator who's going to come from that side or something.
And then going up high ground, I guess it's kind of the same as the nighttime fight thing. You don't want to place it too early because it'll get destroyed, but you want to, when you know your team's going to go, you want to have as much vision up there as possible. So,
yeah, I mean, high ground vision's weird. Like, you can try to place these wards, they tend to get dewarded. But if you have jump and you just need to see someone, drop the ward fast and then jump immediately, you know, before they can even deward it. There might even be a sentry there already, but if you can play fast enough.
Yeah. Typically, if the enemy is pushing high ground, or I know that they're going to be soon, I just have the sentry wards up prematurely. Yeah. And I know that there's like some weird corner spots for both sides as well.
Yeah, those wards are definitely better. They're just hard to place outside of vision. They tend to get seen a lot, but yeah, there's that. That, which isn't quite as good. There's not like a great one here. I don't even think this one, I've never placed this ward even. This one even, yeah, it's not the worst, I guess. It sort of sees something. This one used to be better. I do remember a time where this could actually like see back kind of. Maybe you can place that a little further. I don't know.
The tree used to not be there.
Okay. Yeah. And this one just started doesn't have one. But yeah, I mean, those, like, high ground is just, they should just have this area plastered in sentries, and you can't keep vision there. That's their base. That's the place they always hold. That's kind of the way it is. And that's, like, most, I mean, okay, so, like, your big objectives are high ground, Roche, and then as basically the different towers are kind of just defined by the quadrants. We're sort of talking about the map here, but basically Dota, I really don't like the current map. I think it's like really idiot-proof. The map is basically 4 plateaus. You know, 1 jungle, 2 jungle, 3 jungles, 4 jungles. They're all high ground, so if you ever have the high ground, you have the high ground from every angle. So you're just kind of... Dota's about taking these objectives, and the way you take the objectives is by holding the high ground around the objective. That's kind of like it. So I can talk about each of the quadrants in terms of like, kind of like the way you play the space. But this quadrant's like the weirdest one. You can get away with more vision in weird spots, but in general, like they'll try to sentry this space because this is the idiot ward everyone places. This is the other idiot ward everyone places. So the places you tend to want to get vision are like sometimes here if this one works, especially if you were entering from this side. This ward's pretty good. I don't think this one gets dewarded that much.
Yeah, I've been moving to use that one. Sometimes even putting a sentry on the further left spot, going uphill, waiting to see that get dewarded and just walking around and placing it there.
Yeah, that's fine. If you can get to this space while ensuring they didn't have vision from anywhere else, this kind of ward somewhere in this space is pretty good. It misses the sentry that gets placed up here. It misses this sentry. It misses this sentry. This kind of stuff is okay. You can place deep here if you want to kind of start seeing like sort of behind their towers, but like it's not great vision. That's an option. And then this one is really just a really good spot, but it's that kind of spot that you want to defend while you're taking this tower. Defensively, I don't think defensive vision is like, you just place vision somewhere to see them entering your jungle. It's pretty straightforward. So I'm mostly talking about like attacking them offensively. Offensively, in the off jungle, you have... This spot's always kind of funny because you can place vision like here, here, all the way up to here, all the way up to here, and there's like not one sentry that sees all of them, but the sentry does tend to be like here-ish, and then they place vision here to see that. So
'Tis hardly a challenge.
the ways I tend to place vision here are like, oh, I'm running through the river and I want to see a little bit of this space. I'll drop this ward while I'm going
Over
through
here.
there. This
Yeah,
ward, kind of the idiot ward. I don't like it so much.
I've actually been diving for the bounty runes at 5 minutes. Sometimes skipping my bounty rune entirely and just going for it.
Yeah, look at the I can do it.
And like I get deep vision for that second 5 minutes, which is nice.
Sure, yeah, that could be an option. This vision.
Nice to see the rotation if mid's coming, but also
What's that you say?
yeah, it's
You can place vision in this space. It's not very useful because so the weird thing about this one is that you can't actually see the main part of the jungle like over here from anywhere here. All you can do is place it on the high ground. That's the only way to get that vision. So it's more like I'm pushing this tower. That's why you want this vision here, or I do this one too.
Where to?
This
One of my
vision's
favorite
just not
keywords-
great because it gets dewarded.
Yes.
People just like drop random sentries here. It also, at least the way I tend to play this, is when I'm checking this spot, I deward here because it sees this as well.
yeah, and then below the trees right there is really good as well. Just like directly below that hard camp, you can place it and see the cliff and see a big area.
Yeah, but I'd say most of these spots are more as a function of like, I didn't control this space, I was just trying to get some vision while I was in the general area. Like, oh, I'll slip up here really quick and drop a ward here, or I'll slip up this way and drop a ward here. So those kind of tend to get placed if you're like not comfortable taking the space, you just want some deep vision. Whereas these kind of spaces you take are the really deep wards that tend to get dewarded all the time, so you're trying to hold the space and make sure you don't lose this vision when you're committing to these, because they will get dewarded as soon as you leave, like 100% of the time. Whereas I'd say these don't get dewarded as reliably.
The enemy's bottom tower has fallen.
Okay, and then Radiant side. Fuck, this fucking area is just like too big. I don't know. There's like so much shit you can do here. Just never ward this unless you're like having to cruise through the area. It'll 100% get dewarded. It's like when I think about like
25% smaller than the original Dota map.
Now, where was I?
the way I have to think about like dewarding this space is like I always have to check this because some retard will place a ward here, like 100% of the time. But I also need to check like all the other spots too. So you have this sentry which sees the eyeball spot along with like this space here. You have this sentry which sees both high grounds. You have this sentry which sees like some of the. That's just like. These are just decent spots, like anywhere left of the high ground, because they will tend to put the sentry on the high ground. Left of this space, anywhere is like kind of okay.
Over here.
But then, you know, wherever you place these sentries, I mean, you can place this sentry to check that and that. You can place this sentry to check that and that. You can place this sentry, but you need like 2 sentries because you need to see like this. This isn't unreasonable either. Like, you need to see so much shit in this jungle. I feel like it's like harder to sentry it.
Shine on.
But anyways, like, those are all
Your
totally
top
reasonable
tower is
spots.
under attack.
This is definitely my favorite space to play in. Like, wards here. This ward here doesn't get dewarded very often. You start seeing like deeper when they're, you know, farming this real. This is like a super dangerous camp to farm because of this high ground here. So this is like, if you're kind of moving the way your team wants to move, which is like you're moving with whatever your like threatening heroes on the map, and you take their safe lane tier 1 to kind of like secure their jungle for your carry. Their space kind of ends up, you know, the map shifts where like this is almost more where your carry farms, and then this is kind of where their carry ends up farming, because you tend to trade these 2 tier 1s. As a result of that, this lane and this lane is kind of theirs, so you get a lot of times where like their mid's still a farming mid, and he's like defending his tower, and then he defended his tower, so he's gonna go farm this camp, and then he bounces back mid, but oh, this camp's not here, so then he goes to farm this one. So if you like moved this space with your strong hero, take this tier 1 with a catapult, move deep into their jungle, clear their vision, and I'm gonna drop this ward, you catch a core farming this space a lot. So I like controlling this area a lot when I'm dire side. Along with it just tends to get dewarded less. And yeah, you know, you still see a lot of movement in the space, because you kind of just have to move either from here or here to get into this space. Sometimes you go this way, and that's the one downside of this, is you don't see movement from here.
Shine on.
I don't like this ward. This ward, if you're depending on the way you're playing, if like you're threatening between the off lane and the mid lane, this is important space to control. So you deward it a lot. And yeah, you can place vision there too. It's like sometimes if I'm a... This is defensively, I guess, but if I'm a Radiant safe lane 5 that does not counter TP very well, and my mid is like an SF or something that's like liable to get dove, and they have like a Tusk or something, like I will tell my mid to place their ward here like 100% of the time, because you will always catch their 4 rotating like through to try to kill mid.
Yeah.
But other than that, like it's not great vision after that point in time. Like I'd rather have this ward a lot of the time. I think it's a little bit better. It's a little less likely to get dewarded.
What's that you say?
This ward's like fine. It's just hard to place a lot of the time because it requires you to go through so much other space to deward first. Oh, and then this ward behind the tower like never gets dewarded. Like I actually don't think I've ever. I can't think of a time cognizantly where I've lost this ward to a deward.
The dreaded, you accidentally put it under tower vision.
Okay, yeah, don't do that. And then this ward, sometimes you just place it really deep because they don't expect it, they don't deward it, whatever. But it's not as good as this vision is when you're pushing this tier 2. This tier 2, it's actually as good to have this vision. Whereas this being high ground vision lets you see over so much space, you get to see so much more as a result. Whereas this kind of sees like
it sees a camp.
This rotation like doesn't happen as much. It's like a little different. It's a little further away from their actual base, I guess. Or, no, about the same. I don't know what that is about that.
It's just harder to walk through there.
But either way, yeah, I don't think this is like a particularly important spot. I'd rather just have this one or this one most of the time.
I forget.
Okay.
Okay, and then this one. The high ground ward is the idiot spot that everyone ends up fighting over. So the vision, unfortunately, you kind of have to gamble here because you can't keep a ward here ever. They'll always deward it. So your choice is here, and you hope that if they were placing their sentry on not the high ground, they placed it from the wrong side, like that was where they dewarded from. This vision's better. It sees a little more into this space. Your other option is this ward, which is less likely to get dewarded, but it doesn't really see as much into the plateau. It only sees them like entering it. This one's also really good for when you're pushing this tower. But this one's way less likely. So your options are like least likely to get dewarded, but probably the worst vision outside of like specifically pushing this tower. This one's less likely to get dewarded, but still pretty likely, especially if they have a support that can see high ground with a spell like AA or CM or something, because they'll just put the sentry here like every time. This is a pretty common ward spot, but it's like either one's better than this. Never place this ward unless you're like again holding this space specifically, killing any idiot who walks up here or up here.
Right. Okay.
Then other than that, you know, you have your like, oh shit, we need vision because we're trying to Roche, and so you place the quick ward. I think this one's better usually if you're placing the quick ward. If you're like kind of in this space for, you know, whatever reason, placing this ward's pretty good. Sometimes the sentry ends up like kind of lazily placed in this space. On top of that, like no matter what, they either miss this on the left if they place it, you know, too far to the right, or they miss this spot right here if they place it too far to the left. So this is valuable because it's like slightly less likely to get dewarded. This is valuable because it's slightly less likely to get dewarded. Either one's fine. It kind of just depends on where you're entering from.
Yeah. And
that's it. This is actually, I should have thought about this. It's a good way to think about it, where like there's the kinds of wards you can place when you have control of that plateau, and the kinds of wards you can place when you're like kind of around it, but you can't take the space. And they do tend to be like kind of polar opposites. One of them is like way more likely to get dewarded because it's such critical vision. One is less likely to get dewarded, but it doesn't give you such a good vision. And as a result, they're more or less likely to fight over it as a result, because it's just a common ward spot or a not common ward spot. So what you want to avoid is situations where like it's not the best vision, but they also deward it all the time. And that would be kind of like not on the edges, but not on the idiot spot. It's like somewhere in the middle here. It's like anywhere near where they're going to place a sentry anyways. It's just like bad vision. Don't place that.
Alright.
And that kind of applies, and that cleanly applies to every plateau, kind of in the same way.
Right. And again, this is all about like trying to determine what information are you trying to get and why, instead of just blindly placing them.
Yeah, and then to expand on that same thing again, that same there's two types of vision. There's the kind of vision where you just want vision down somewhere to know where they're not, at the very least. Like and that's where any vision is good vision, because you place a ward somewhere. Okay, well I know they're not there, so they have to be in one of these spaces, as opposed to having 5 wards in your inventory and your map is black.
Okay.
And then the opposite of that is those very critical wards that you need to hold while you're doing something specifically, which, pushing a tower. Oh, we need this high ground vision and this high ground control.
Yeah.
And you can always just kind of be running around. The best way to make sure you're continually placing your wards is just think of those two things, being like, okay, we're going to go push this tower, so I want to try to control this space. How do I control that space? Well, I'm going to place like 3 sentries on my way there and play with my 3, or we're going to smoke in there deep and try to go for a kill and place that deep ward. And then, in the meantime, not every ward's going to get placed like that, because you have a finite number of smokes, you have a finite number of brain cells on your 3-player, whatever. Then just think, as you're moving around the map, what's some decent vision that could give us some intel? It doesn't take me a lot of time. Say I was already like mid lane and I was running to the off lane and I just want to drop some vision to hold the space. I'll just I was pushing back this wave and then I was trying to join my cores up in this space. But I'm like, well, I'm kind of worried about them entering this space because I have like some core that wants to farm Ingus a lot. So I'll just drop a ward like while I'm on my way up there, It's not the best vision, it's not the worst vision, it's just kind of like keeping vision up somewhere on the map. It didn't cost me anything because I was already going to move that way anyways.
And again, the wards, it doesn't matter if you see someone for 2 seconds or 4 seconds, you get the same.
You get the same information, or generally speaking, you will. Yeah.
So, so seeing kind of more paths is better than seeing like right where you are, seeing that whole big sweeping movement of a player moving through. If they're moving towards the left, they're moving towards the left.
Yeah. So. Okay. You'll have this kind of constant flow of wards entering your inventory, assuming you're buying them, which I hope you're buying them. Just spam buy them all the time. Like, every time a ward's off cooldown, you buy it instantly, and you buy a sentry or 2 sentries or whatever. That just, you have to get that down mechanically. You are always buying those things. Then, once they're in your inventory, as you're moving on the map, think about 3 things. Number 1, I'm moving like along this path. I'm moving to the river here, or I'm moving across this jungle, or I'm moving from this lane to this lane. What's some vision I want in that area somewhere that's not gonna hurt my efficiency, but we want some vision down? And then drop that ward. The other thing to consider is, okay, we're actually taking an objective. Where do I need to get vision? You walk in there, you probably walk in with your team. It's a little more of a commitment. You're deliberately moving into this space. And then the third thing is always have a ward on you to drop in the middle of the fight. So and you still have to make a bunch of decisions like on the fly, and you're not going to have perfect vision all the time. And then sometimes you just like die 3 times in a row trying to place vision, and you end up with 4 wards in your inventory. Like, it happens occasionally, but I can count like on one hand the number of times in the last year I've ended up with like 4 wards in my inventory. It shouldn't really be that common.
Yeah. And then as well as communicating with your 4 and likely your 3, who's the playmaker, hey, let's smoke and go take control, so that way you can establish vision and control at the same time.
Yeah. Or also, if you want to go do something like you're a wave clear support and you're trying to keep a lane, like, a lot of times your carry will fuck off to the jungle and you'll be like defending this tower for as long as you can on like Coddle or Jakiro or Treant, or those that's your job a lot of times. You can't place wards during that time, and you're stuck down there for like 2 minutes or 3 minutes sometimes. So you try to tell your 4, like, hey, can you place this round of wards somewhere on the map? Like, let them figure it out. They'll probably, it's better than nothing,
Right.
Because you do get to that awkward point where other roles think it's their job to place vision during the laning stage, and then as soon as the landing stage ends, they're fucking done buying wards. They're never doing it again. but a lot of times it's important for someone else to get a deep ward somewhere because they're already in that space, and it's not worth your time to run all the way across the map to go do it or something.
Yeah.
I'll tell thee everything I can.
I think that's pretty much everything, though.
Yeah.
That was a lot, obviously, but...
It is, but like even just
Your
some of the
bottom
small
tower
things that
is
I
under
can,
attack.
like just that concept of 2 seconds, 4 seconds, whatever, and then taking some time to actually
Like, look at
maneuver
what
the
vision
ward
you're
around.
getting from the ward, yeah. Like, this is like the greatest addition to the game ever. Like, look at this. This shit matters so much. It's like super
Yeah.
nice.
Your bottom tower is under
It really helps, like, understand what vision you're
because
getting.
I'm certain that wasn't in before Reborn.
It might have been around Reborn. I don't really remember, honestly. It's been around for as long as I have been a dedicated 5 player. I'm like 99% sure of that.
I just remember
Mm-hmm.
never really playing support before LD2L and Reborn and stuff because it was just so miserable all the time. Sentries had half the half the range of wards and cost 150, and you always had to have 2, and they were in separate slots, and wards cost money. Like 150 for 1. TPs cost 135 gold.
Yeah, it was. I'm glad I did not play 5 back then. I was mostly a core player.
So
Yeah. So, but I don't know. We've been in this for about like 45 minutes or so. So talk about a lot of different things. Just if there is any takeaway, it's those 3 ways you place vision. It's like the kind of miscellaneous throw some vision down wards as you're doing other things. The critical objective-based vision that you're placing, and then mid-fight wards. Just like always be thinking about those 3 things specifically, and what you want to do with them.
And so, especially after that 10-minute, maybe even 12-minute mark, just having that fight ward and maybe fight sentry as well in your inventory.
Yeah, definitely don't, like...
The enemy's top tower has
I mean,
fallen.
there's a balance, because
Yeah.
depending on where you are and where you feel like you need vision, that doesn't line up with your ward cooldown. So sometimes you don't have any... So sometimes you have 0 wards in your inventory. Or sometimes you have 2 or 3. It does vary a little bit, but in general,
and you don't need your fight ward if your mid player
enemy's
somehow
top
took out all
barracks
3
has
of them
fallen.
and you're just pushing. Then you just need to get control vision down too, so like understanding what is actually happening in the game for you to maximize what you're using.
Yeah. But really, like, that's the thing that grinds my gears most often watching like 5 players. It's just like wandering
Enemy's top barracks
across
has
the
fallen.
map with like 4 wards in your inventory and just placing none of them. Like, I don't even care where you put it. Just like drop that vision somewhere. The number of times that I feel like I've dropped some kind of random ass ward that like wasn't. Holy shit! I greased up racks. The number of times it's happened where like I didn't feel like it was the best vision to place, but I was like, okay, well, I'm in the area and I need to get vision down somewhere over here, so I drop it, and then like 3 or 4 minutes later, it's just randomly really, really relevant. It happens more often than you think.
Yeah, I feel like I spend a lot of my time doing nothing, and you've commented on that before.
Yeah.
So.
And that's just kind of, I don't know how to make people not, do nothing. That's kind of, it's on you,
Yeah, I mean, it's just knowing what to do, and oftentimes I just keep falling up, so we'll see how far that gets me. All right.
What's that you say?
Oh, and then one other type of ward is just like a lane ward, which is pretty straightforward. It's just like you're pushing a tower, so you put a ward behind or in front of it or whatever.
I get a lot of vision between the tier
The
1 and tier
enemy's
2.
middle tower has fallen.
Yeah, that's always really good. The key thing about it is you're usually, the information you're getting out of it is either behind the tower you're seeing an opportunity to jump someone to force a fight behind the tower, or if it's in front of the tower you're seeing people TPing to that location. That's how you kind of think about those 2 wards, generally
The
speaking.
enemy's middle tower
And that
has
applies
fallen.
to any lane, basically. But yeah, so that's about it. We're actually done now, promise.
All right. I'm gonna go get rested for RD2L in 12
All right.
minutes. Thanks.
Oh yeah, sure.